guitar heroes?
Guitar heroes are just, there's just so many of them, I don't really know where to start. I'll start really when I discovered the guitar. It was really Les Paul who I first ever heard, you know, and said, oh, I like that sound. But of course it was such a marvellously contrived sound, you know, it was all very well recorded and all this. And it was a whole musical style. So when I got into the guitar, I didn't know, you know, I couldn't make it sound like Les Paul, you know. But at the same time, people were saying to me, look, you know, popular music's all very well, but there's a lot of guitar you could learn from that's outside the, you know, popular music and rock. So this is partly my family, and they, maybe because they didn't want to hear 24 hours of the Shadows and Cliff Richard and all this, they you know, they wanted to change my viewpoint. It's quite healthy though. And initially I heard Django Reinhardt was the first jazz guitarist I heard, and took me by storm. I mean, I had to listen to this constantly. So Django, and then the great Tal Farlow, who's a legend in his own lifetime. I mean, he's much more a guitarist, which I think is very unfortunate because, you know, you get the George Bensons and, you know, Wes Montgomerys and fantastic players, but Tal has got very much his own approach, harmonically, technically too, that he's one of the fastest guitarists that you can hear play. But that it isn't just because he's fast, it's because he's fast and comprehensible, intelligent, melodic, which of course a lot of people aren't, you know. Who was I thinking of? You get these records you see in guitar shops, sometimes done by brilliant guitarists, like Jimmy Bryant was a wonderfully advanced guitarist, but occasionally, somewhere along their career, they do a record like, you know, the fastest guitar in the West or something, and as a guitarist, I can't help but buy it, and I put it on and go, oh, God, this is all, it's all cliche, you know, but Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant in their early days, when they used to be a duo, pedal steel and guitar, were phenomenal. But really, early days, Rick Nelson's guitarist, and later Elvis Presley's guitarist, James Burton, was one of the most inspiring guitarists because he was the first one to just use the guitar melodically. This wasn't guitar cliches, you know, like any of that stuff at all. This was just tunes, really, just like the vocal line played with fantastic expertise. And he was with Rick Nelson, who's most probably, a lot of people won't know much about him, but of course Elvis did make more of a mark. And he had the great guitarist Scotty Moore with him originally, who used country picking style, which showed really great integration that rock music was making. Rock music wasn't a new kind of music, it was a new mixture of country, a bit of jazz and folk and things. God, this sounds awful. And it came together, and Scotty Moore was really a bouncy guitarist, you know. It was simple stuff, but played in such a wonderful way. But I think the different styles of guitar that I listened to, like I used to like flamenco a lot, people like Sabicas and that, but actually I really loved it when Paco de Lucia came out of Spain, if you like, would be the best way of saying it. He came out of Spain, started making records in Europe, and since he's just recently toured with John McLaughlin in the guitar trio that they annually tour with, and he is in a film called Carmen. It's the Spanish version of the Carmen story, which is really worth going to see. There's not enough guitar in it, obviously, but he has done some marvellous records. He's just done one on compact disc, actually, that's sensational, called Solo. 2 words in Spanish. My Spanish is terrible, I won't attempt it. But he, at least, is so fresh, and although he's playing flamenco, it's not, it's got a fair bit of stomping and singing going on, but it's not like, oh God, turn off the castanet player. You know, you don't feel like enclosed in this deep ritual of Spanish flamenco music. It's much more about today, you know, and that's what's great about Paco de Lucia. He's a performer right for now, and you can listen to it. It's got fretless bass and percussionist. You know, it's not a whole lot of people going diddle-diddle-diddling. It's really much more exciting than predictable flamenco. But I would like to just cite, maybe as my last example, a guitarist who's had so much success and yet not so much as a guitarist, and that's George Harrison of the Beatles. I think he did a great deal for me and other guitarists in the organised rock guitarist, not the blues wailing guitarist or the just the guy who improvised all the time, but because of the I suppose restraints that the Beatles put on the musical needs of their group. I mean, they had great songs, they had great singers. You know, what more do you need other than great guitar riffs, which George came up with? And they used Gretsch guitars, and besides, you know, the likes of, well, I suppose, Neil Young, rockabilly groups, Chet Atkins, again. But besides that, it's one of the Eddie Cochran used Gretsch guitars, but, you know, George Harrison used Gretsch guitar. That was the sound of the Beatles to me, was this sort of twangy, individual sound. It wasn't all Fenders and Gibsons, which were really very recognisable sounds. When you think of, say, U2, I mean, it's very much a Fender sound, or you think of most of the blues guitarists, you know, it's very much a Gibson sort of sound very often. Can't generalise too much without coming unstuck, but today there's got to be me, I suppose. I've got to get out and do the damn thing all over again. That's what I want to do. I want to bring my music right up to date, because I think in a way 1980 started well, and I think Asia was a good start to the decade, you know. But I definitely want to. Now this is silly. I can't say this. No, I can't really. You have to find a way of ending that, because it's a dreadful way. I mean, it's really like, hey guys, you know, it's going to be me now. No, I hate that.
All right, we'll sort that one out. Does anyone, you're looking a bit hot under there.
I am getting a bit hot, actually.
Can you open the doors? Can she just come in with tissue? Okay, I wanted to go back to your family. You mentioned them before. Were they a musical family?
Not really, no. They had records, you know, and we had the traditional sort of 1950s radiogram, you know, this big thing with a speaker underneath it. All it went, it was very bassy, you know. So we had a collection of records which ranged from sort of marching tunes, you know, brass bands and things, a bit of Guy Mitchell, and I suppose what I mentioned earlier was Les Paul and Mary Ford records. But before I got onto them, I used to find marching bands quite exciting. I mean, much like my 9-year-old does, he loves to leap about to music. He likes, you know, hip hop and, you know, scratching and all this, you know, which is quite unusual, I think, for a 9-year-old, but it's healthy. And likewise, I like anything I could jump about to was good fun, until, you know, you start wrecking the chairs and wrecking the sofas. And then the only thing was I had an uncle who, not on my side of the family, on the other side of the family, sort of, who played the clarinet. And I used to ask him questions when I was young about this. And at the same time, I took up the guitar. My brother, Philip, who is a film editor in Australia now, he took up the clarinet as well, because he liked traditional jazz. So we had a guitar and a clarinet trying to be learned at the same time. And my parents were tearing their hair out, and my brother Phil, he started going off into jazz, modern jazz, I suppose you'd have to call it. And the clarinet didn't really fit, you know, into modern jazz, so he stopped playing. I think in a way that was a great thing, because it gave me complete freedom. There was only one instrument being learnt in the house. I had the reign of the noise, you know, and the clatter of pretending to play things or trying to find out how to play things. But they were very very considerate, really, about it. I think it's very hard, if you're not a musical family, to be able to judge somebody's musical ability, which by the time I was 17 or something, they did start to help me much more, help in quite often the fashion of money, of helping me to get a good guitar, coming to odd gigs and just showing a bit of support. But really I think my father is more musically inclined than my mother. My dad would be quite happy to turn records up very, very loud and just sort of sit there, you know, bubbling along. But my mum only listens to my records, you know, and she usually says, we don't hear enough of you these days, you know, things like that. And when I played her Alpha, she said, well, where are you? You know, and I said, well, that's a good question, actually. And they have their own quiet way of accommodating music, but they're not by any means what you'd call a sort of a musical family where everybody was playing and singing and all that sort of thing. It was much more reserved.
Right. In Yes, you merged classical with rock. How did that come about?
It was good timing with Rick coming in the band and me, because Rick Wakeman had had some classical a year or something in the music college, you know. And people usually thought that I'd had some sort of musical training, which I hadn't. But I was, I think part of it was just the mixture of an acoustic guitar style within the group. I usually think of roundabout, when I'm asked the question you asked about the classical influences in rock, in Yes in particular, in the early 70s, was really the marriage that we were trying to do, having acoustic guitars involved in the band. I tend to think that's one of the things, the sort of more dramatic sort of guitar cadenza style, say the beginning of Roundabout, was much more classical than anything else, although musically the ideas were really quite simple. They were more like folk bits, you know. I think when Rick came in, he added a certain twiddliness to things, and lo and behold we had some rather kitsch version, a bit like the Bach well-tempered clavichord record. There was a bit of that on Fragile, Brahms, Cans and Brahms or something. But I don't know whether it was in the singing, whether or not maybe there was a bit of that in Chris Squire's voice. He was a bit of a choir singer. I don't know how you can relate it to percussion. So really I would say it's most probably in the acoustic guitar and Rick's twiddly keyboard approach. And also, of course, we used to use the sort of church organ on a few records. Occasionally we went to great lengths to get a church organ on a record, because as you can imagine, churches don't have recording studios built in them, so you either had to take the recording studio to the church or pipe the church into the recording studio, which we did in Switzerland once, where many miles away, Rick was playing the song, what's it called? I think it's called Parallels, and Rick was playing it while we were actually playing it about 3 miles away in the studio. That story's not the first time that story's been told, but it's the sort of thing that we were doing. Or you take a 1/4-inch tape into, you know, a Revox or something, into a church, record the organ part, and go back in and mix it into, like we did Close to the Edge. That's how we did Close to the Edge. Big organ comes in the middle. It's a real church organ. And I suppose those sort of ideas were a bit weird at the time, and some of it worked, but some of it did add the classical overtone to the group.
Great. How did your current project with Steve Hackett come about?
Ooh.
What will it be?
You knew. I was trying to get that secret. Oh, good. Steve Hackett popped in to see my manager and said, you know, sort of, you know, he'd done several, if not many, solo albums, and he wanted to do something that was maybe a little bit more worldly than sort of local. And Brian sort of said, well, do you know that Steve's, you know, he's not in Asia anymore. So we met up and just had a preliminary talk, much like you've got to break the ice and see if there's any common ground. And we both felt like doing a group without keyboards, which is what we're doing. And because I haven't done a group like that since 1969, and in a way it gives guitarists more scope and freedom not to have the sometimes blanketing effect of multi-keyboards in the band. So although I've worked in that environment happily for some time, I'm quite like a double guitar idea. I think there's things that Steve and I can do for each other which are deservingly right, befitting, if you like, for us to do for each other, and gives me scope to do. I always felt I was quite a powerful electric rhythm guitarist, and you know the choppiness that I can add. Steve's got a lyrical approach. We can swap that round. We can explore, if you like, the guitar area a little bit more deeply together, and the projects come together quite comfortably, and it's definitely getting more and more exciting each day. Little things keep happening. We're trying musicians out. We've, in secret, we have an excellent young new singer to spearhead the group, because it's not going to be an instrumental group. I think they'll be a little bit indulgent, but I think maybe through this group we can start to introduce the guitar instrumental area again, and hopefully move on to that perhaps later. But the basic premise of the group is no keyboards, no hogwash, no hard sell, just some internal friction going on in the group. The right kind of friction, not the anti sort of negative friction, but a good guitar project really, that's more of a exposing area. So we want to be exposed a little bit as guitarists, because I think, yes, in Asia, often people said, don't you feel a bit cramped, you know, with all these people doing the thing next to you, you know. And no, I didn't at the time, but now I feel like it's a really great time not to have any imposing sounds around, just working on, you know, bass guitar, two guitars, drums and vocals. I think it's going to be quite refreshing for us, and not to... In actual fact, what we've been talking about every day together, Steve Hackett and I, is the guitar part syndrome. Instead of it being guitar part versus keyboard part, which has been for many years my job, you know, to sort of try and balance, sometimes with great difficulty, the roles of two potentially soloing instruments, providing one has to provide backup for the other, and when the song's involved, then you've got two instruments that could back up. It gets a little bit complicated. Sometimes you just literally got to stop playing. So the Steve Hackett, Steve Howe project is definitely a new lease of life for me, and since I've started it, which is over the last 2 or 3 months, my guitar collection suddenly is alive again. You know, I look at my 150 plus guitars and I think, boy, you know, these are gems, these are gems. When in a way, I suppose, being in a group with a keyboard player, there wasn't enough room to look at the guitars and see these as my tools. You know, they were more like a collection I had at home for my own amusement, you know. But now I see them coming out much more into the group itself. And also, it means that Steve and I have much more freedom writing, and there won't be so many egos struggling for, you know, the credit or, in fact, the money. But there'll be more of I think, an honest appraisal of the best of what we do, because he's sort of picking the best of what I do, and I'm picking the best of what he does, which is shows you a very nice side to a partnership. It's not as crowded as 4 or 5 people, all demanding and attempting to get a sort of an equal balance. Because this group is going to be basically him and me, with some young younger guys to sort of help maintain a fresh approach, because we want the music not to be, well, basically in a word, predictable. We don't want this to be a predictable arrangement. We want it to be something different.
Great. And finally, the awful question. Can you sum up Steve Howe in 2 sentences?
5'10", eyes are blue. Now let me think. Okay, Steve Howe in a few sentences, not too easy. Maybe one sentence would be easy. No, guitarist extraordinaire. Potentials, many potentials hidden, you know, like my hurdy-gurdy playing, my dancing, all these things totally hidden. And I didn't even get a chance to dance in Asia videos. Now let's start again. Well, to answer that question, what is, who is, and how is Steve Howe, I would just say what I'd like to be remembered for. You know, when I'm walking down the street when I'm about 80 and somebody says, isn't that the guy who used to play guitar in those bands in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and perhaps 90s? I'd like to be remembered as a individual guitarist. That's always what I wanted to be, individual. You know, very important that, because I think it's not that I want to stand out from the crowd like a sore thumb, because I don't think I do, but I wanted to be my own style of guitarist, because what I liked about other guitarists was that you could identify them. So even if a few people can say, you know, without even knowing it's me, they can hear it, that is the greatest compliment, because that's what I can do with Segovia. I can do that with all the great guitarists. I don't have to know it's them, I can tell it's them. That's the greatest compliment you can pay to a musician, or maybe even a singer. You know, take Caruso, take Robert Tier, you know, take Peter Pears, the great singers of the world. You know, Robert Plant, John Lennon. You know, I mean, somebody doesn't have to tell you. So that's a great thing. Back to me, Steve Howe. I'm a family person, so it's very important to me that the people I love most, you know who I am, and I get time with them. So I think in a way I'm a 50-50 person. I'm 50% into my career, because I've always been career conscious, but also some questions I got asked in the early 70s were like, well, how can you have a family and be in a rock band? It's not difficult. You just have to put your foot down now and again and say, I will be available to my family at this time, instead of the usual criteria in music business is being available to the act, being available to the record company, or, you know, like being available 11 o'clock today to do this. That's great. I always want to keep doing that, but as long as I never lose sight of the importance, personal importance to me, of my 3 children and my wife.
Great. That's fantastic.
Good. Here 24 hours of the Shadows and Cliff Richard and all this, they wanted to change my viewpoint. It's quite healthy though, and initially I heard Django Reinhardt was the first jazz guitarist I heard, and took me by storm. I mean, I had to listen to this constantly. So Django, and then the great Tal Farlow, who's a legend in his own lifetime. I mean, he's much more a guitarist, which I think is very unfortunate, because, you know, you get the George Bensons and, you know, Wes Montgomerys, and fantastic players, but Tal has got very much his own approach, harmonically, technically too, that he's one of the fastest guitarists that you can hear play. But it isn't just because he's fast, it's because he's fast and comprehensible, intelligent, melodic, which of course a lot of people aren't, you know. Who was I thinking of? You get these records you see in guitar shops, sometimes done by brilliant guitarists, like Jimmy Bryant was a wonderfully advanced guitarist, but occasionally, somewhere along their career, they do a record like, you know, the fastest guitar in the West or something, and as a guitarist, I can't help but buy it, and I put it on and go, oh, God, this is all that little. It's all cliche, you know, but Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant in their early days, when they used to be a duo, pedal steel and...
Okay. Who
Guitar heroes are just, there's just so many of them, I don't really know where to start. I'll start really when I discovered the guitar. It was really Les Paul who I first ever heard, you know, and said, oh, I like that sound. But of course it was such a marvellously contrived sound, you know, it was all very well recorded and all this. And it was a whole musical style. So when I got into the guitar, I didn't know, you know, I couldn't make it sound like Les Paul, you know. But at the same time, people were saying to me, look, you know, popular music's all very well, but there's a lot of guitar you could learn from that's outside the, you know, popular music and rock. So this is partly my family, and maybe because they didn't want to